Hello, welcome everybody. This will probably be the last session of Dreamforce for you all. This is the Apex What's New and What's Coming session. We will be making forward-looking statements in this presentation, so it's important that you make your purchasing decisions based on products and services that are currently available. And yeah, again, thank you for coming. Hope you've had a great Dreamforce. We'll look forward to sharing our roadmap for Apex with you all. I am Daniel Ballinger, the product manager for Apex, and joining me today is...
I'm Jared Sulam, an engineer on the Apex team.
Great.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
So we're going to run you through four key areas today. What we're doing for asynchronous processing in Apex, areas around cursors, what we're doing for data cloud integration if you need to pull that information into Apex. Then we're going to cover a much wider area of data processing and a number of features that we've added there to make that easier in Apex for you. And finally, Jared's going to give us a run through of what's new and changing with 2GP package versioning in Apex, as how that's going to evolve over time for us. And then finally, I'll give you a rundown slide of our roadmap again. So first up, let's talk about what are we doing for asynchronous processing in Apex and what's changing in that environment. So many of you, when you sort of have an asynchronous job, say you have to pull all the contact records that were updated in the last 400 days. Because that could be a potentially really large amount of records, that could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records, you can't process them in one transaction. So you'd probably naturally reach for a batch job. Well, I want to run you through cursors, which is another option you can use for working with query results that could be larger than you can handle in one request. So let's run through that as an example. Up front, you establish the cursor by giving it a SOQL query. Pretty similar to most other dynamic SOQL queries you have, and you'll get a cursor back from that. Once you've got the cursor back, you can store that in a field or any other thing, any other variable. It's a serializable state, so once it's stored there and you've got it in your queuable job, you can then pass that cursor into the execute method, and that's where you can actually start using it. So you'll note, when we actually established that cursor, we didn't bring back all the records, we basically got a reference to those. So you don't have 100,000 records in this transaction, you have a cursor that you can then use to fetch them. That's exactly what the fetch command does. You give it an index to start from, in this case we're starting from position 0, pull the next 200 records. You can then process them in your Apex transaction, delete them, email them out, do whatever you need to do with them, work within that context. And then in your transaction you can say, well hang on, how much have I processed, how much more have I got to use? We have a get number of records on your cursor, which will tell you the size of the complete result set. And then you can then pass that through into the queuable object in the next iteration to say, resume processing from here. And that's a really great way because you can now chunk through the records. If you want to scale up or down, you can fetch more or less in one transaction and work back and forward through them.
Yeah, and that also integrates with another really nice feature of queuables, which is transaction finalizers. So if you get it wrong, maybe you do a bit too much processing on that cursor, you can catch the exception in the transaction finalizer and then continue processing maybe with a smaller chunk size.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah. So if you hit like a CPU or a heap limit, that's going to terminate your queuable. The transaction finalizer will handle that and still has the serialized state of the cursor that it can resume from and say, well, hang on, I tried to process 200 records and I hit a heap limit. I'm going to try 100 in the next time, and I can scale up and down to adjust to that.
Yeah. And I think there was another really nice use case you had, Daniel.
Yes, yeah. So cursors are also an excellent tool to use if you're doing page controllers. So you've got a Visualforce page, you want to be able to page through tens of, well, hopefully you're not trying to show your users tens of thousands of records, but if you need to work through a large result set and bring back chunks of them at a time, it's an excellent alternative to say something like the offset command in your SOQL query. Problem with offset is it's bounded at about, I think, 2,000. It'll max out there. You can't work past that. The alternative a lot of people often work with is a either like primary key chunking in the where clause or constructing basically an elaborate where clause to say, get me this set of records, then get me this set and this set. And that actually becomes really difficult, especially if you're trying to combine it with something like a sort query, a sort by clause. Whereas a cursor, you can just establish that up front and then move back and forward. You can seek randomly through the results. You can jump right to the last page, first page. It's a really useful tool for that type of scenario. Right, from that, let's transition to what we're doing for data cloud integration in Apex. Previously in Apex, if you wanted to pull data back from data cloud, you would have had to do it through the Connect API. And that is still an option, and it still has some pluses and minuses. But at the basic level, you create a SQL, not a SOQL query, and you pass that to Connect API. Now that has some downsides.
Wait, yeah, I think I can see a downside.
Yeah.
Can anyone see like a SQL injection attack here
Yeah.
in the customer ID?
So as Jared points out, the customer ID is literally being concatenated into that string. That means you as the developer, you're going to need to protect against SQL injection to make sure you're not retrieving back records you potentially didn't want to. And then the second part of it, once you actually have made that query, now you have to manually page through those batches of results. And each result is actually quite hard to process. You need to work through all the rows and then manually all the fields in that result set, casting each one of them out as you go. Still works, and in some scenarios it would be the applicable tool, but there's a much easier and more natural way to do queries in Apex, which is, well, that's how you do that, which is SOQL. So that's exactly what we gave you, the ability to SOQL data cloud data model objects, or DMOs, from Apex. And that gives you the really nice features of SOQL, such as compile time type checking, compile time field checking, bindings. It all works the way you would naturally expect. It also gives you things like user mode, which will enforce the level of the security model that Data Cloud provides at the time. So it's a really nice fit for that scenario.
And there's one other really nice feature it gives you. How do we test this?
Yeah.
Since this is Apex, Daniel.
Yeah, that's an important point, right? So this is Apex. If you're going to deploy this to production, you're going to need to be able to test it. So let's say we took that SOQL query and we put it in a pretty common testing scenario, which is, I've got a customer ID, I'm going to pass it to some method, get solar panel events. That method's going to run the SOQL query against Data Cloud. But now I've got a problem. I'm in an Apex test context. And in Apex, you can't actually insert a Data Cloud entity directly in the transaction, especially not in a test context. So how do you write a test that covers that SOQL query? Well, that's where we've given you the SOQL stub provider. This is different than the existing stub provider that Apex gives you. This existing stub provider is for stubbing classes or objects in the Apex execution. This is specifically for doing so against a SOQL query. So this can provide alternative results to that SOQL query rather than going to the database, rather than having to insert fake records. Let's have a look at how that actually works in practice. So to register your SOQL stub provider in your test context, we've given you that new method there, create SOQL stub. You pass it the type of DMO that you want stubbed and the object that will do the stubbing for you. And in terms of actually implementing the object to do the stubbing, we've given you three methods one method with three parameters when you override it. Obviously the object type that you're binding against, and then the query that was provided when that stub was activated. When you do something like so in that previous example, we had the customer ID, which was a binding field. In the query, that will be replaced with a temp variable, and that temp variable will then be available to you in the map parameter, the bind variables. This is really useful. So when in my stub provider, I can say, what customer ID did that SOQL query think it was asking for? And I can use that to generate the results that are going to come back from the stub. Now, you may be familiar with, it's actually quite challenging, or was previously quite challenging in Apex, to construct instances of objects that were unconstructable. And so a DMO is like that. You can't actually insert or create one of those records. How do you get your test to return that to you? Previously, you would have actually probably had to resort to something like JSON deserialization. Works, but it has its downsides. You have to manually construct that JSON string, get the parameters right, get the fields right. So to make that a lot easier for you, we've given you two new methods: test create stub query row and test create stub query rows. And those, rather than having to build that JSON up, you just directly give it the S object type and a map of field values that you want created for that stub record. And then your stub simply returns the results.
Yeah. We do have some limitations as to what you can put into a SOQL stub provider.
Yes, yeah, good point. So yeah, there are limitations here. Obviously, like you can imagine if they were trying to do like a SOQL query within the stub provider.
Wouldn't want to get into recursive loops and so on.
Yeah, we'd be going round and round in circles for days trying to figure out how to solve that stub. So to avoid those situations and keep the stubs focused on just providing stub data, we've put restrictions in that say you can't make SOQL queries, SOSL queries, DML statements, or callouts. We want to keep those stubs focused on just returning that information. Now, This is currently alive in production for you today for Data Cloud objects. In Winter 25, we're also expanding this to external objects because they have much of the same challenges. You can't insert those records in the transaction, but you have queries against them. So that's another feature we're expanding there. Right, so now let's walk through what we're doing for data processing. In Apex, it's quite a common scenario that at some point or another you're going to encounter something that either going to provide you a zip file and you need to extract something from it, or you're going to need to generate that zip file. Let's run through like a fairly basic scenario. I'm going to make a call out to a translation service with some information to translate from some language to say French or English or something. So I build up my payload of JSON, I send it to the translation endpoint. The translation endpoint does its job, generates some JSON, which will be easy for me to process, but then it also helpfully zips the result back before it sends it to me. So now I've got a blob, which is a zip file, and a problem of how do I actually read that data in Apex. Today, there's a third-party tool called ZipX. Pretty clever tool. If you actually look at it, it does pretty ingenious bytecode manipulation, or binary manipulation to extract the zip file. But of course, that has some challenges in how efficient it can actually be as an external tool built on top of our platform. So to make that easier for you, we've given you two new classes. There's a zip reader and a zip writer. And it pretty much does what it says on the tin. So the zip reader, you provided a blob, then you can extract the zip entries from it and get those blobs out. You can see what other zip entries are in there. And the zip writer obviously works in the opposite way. You create zip entries into it, pass it the information you want compressed, and then generate the zip file.
Yeah, so and compared to with using a third-party library, you should be able to zip and unzip a lot more things in the same amount of time, so that saves your CPU limit. But unfortunately, you do still need to live within your heap limit, and it doesn't really help you there. So,
yes,
you're still limited
you're not going to be processing files in the gigabyte size range. You still need to operate within your heap limit of your transaction. This is for smaller, dedicated zip files. Yeah. Right, so let's run through a scenario and talk about why we might want formula evaluation directly at runtime in Apex. So I'll be a product manager. Whoop, I hit my mic. So I'm the product manager. And I have a requirement for my customers. They want to be able to send gift boxes out every year to their accounts that are really important to them. And there's sort of two general requirements here. At first, I want to send it just to my accounts where the account rating is hot, but I know I want the business basically told me they're going to want to evolve that requirement over time. So it needs to be flexible, defined in a language that the business understands and can work with, the admins and that org can work with.
So you're saying in the future as a product manager, you might change your mind?
I might change my mind. It's known to happen as a product manager.
Yeah.
So,
but at least let's focus on like what you want, the first requirement. How about formula field on an account object? Would that work?
Formula fields is great. Admins can do great things with formula fields. It's very expressive. It's a language they understand and know. Let's use that. But then as a product manager, I talk to my customers a bit more, and then I discover, well, actually, this is a bit more complicated than I originally thought. Turns out you don't just send gift boxes out all the time the same way. This changes seasonally sometimes. There's festive seasons, there's holiday seasons, there's promotions, and those differ region by region. And then it also turns out, well, the account team, or the sales team, they want the value of the sales pipeline to come into whether we should actually send this gift box or not. Some customers are more valuable to us than others. And then there's government accounts. I can't actually send these to every possible account. So I need a whole bunch of extra considerations.
So as your developer, I'm thinking, where do these things come from? Who updates them?
Can you express all that in one formula field?
Or even more than one on an account?
Yeah, we're starting to get into the limitations of what we can express in the data model. And then does this information even actually belong in the data model of fields on the object? But we still want that formula expression. But what we're really sort of building up towards is building a much more complex rules engine, but with a syntax that the admins and the business can understand. So let's have a look at how the beta feature of formula evaluation in Apex will help you in that scenario. So we'll start with the formula field, something pretty basic, which we had before, which is the basic requirement, is the rating on this account hot. Pretty simple, admins can understand that. But what if we used formula evaluation in Apex to do this rather than creating the dedicated field? As a very basic example, just to fit it all on one slide, let's take that formula and define it as a string, and then we can create a formula builder instance. We tell the formula builder a few things. We tell it what return type this formula is going to have. We tell it what type of object it's processing over. In this case, it's the account S object. And we obviously give it the formula. And we build an instance of that formula. And that will do some validation, such as making sure the account has the fields, that the formula syntax is correct. We now have a formula instance, and we can, in a loop, just apply that again and again and again to that object type and get the results of the formula. But this is really powerful because it's only using the information we've got at runtime on the account. So we can do this really fast. We don't have to go to the database. A very efficient loop.
Yeah, so I was thinking about one of your other requirements here, the sales pipeline. Where do I get that data? That's not going to live on the account object, is it?
No, I believe the other part of the engineering team built a method that will calculate the sales pipeline for us. But so here I've got the formula field hard-coded. That's not how obviously we would do it in reality. We need something more elaborate that will work with the other requirements we've got. And we need to bring in the sales pipeline data. So let's work through how we could actually do that in Apex. So we'll start off with the basic part again. We've got the formula that we want to evaluate in Apex. But here, instead, we've defined it as a custom metadata type. That's great because we can have a whole bunch of custom metadata type values for all the seasonal, regional variations we need. We can store that data in a way that allows the admins in the org to configure those with formulas they know. So we've got the basic part of our formula, but the second part is we need the sales data. We need to put that into the process to how we're going to do these formula calculations. And this is where another nice part of formula evaluation in Apex comes in. We don't have to bind or limit those to just S objects. We can also do the evaluation against Apex objects. So here we've made a very basic account wrapper Apex object. Note these fields are all global. And we can define a property that will hold the sales pipeline value. And then we can expand our formula to with both the binding ACC field for the account and for the stored sales pipeline. It's still using formula syntax that admins know and pretty familiar with. So on top of that, once we've got that, then to actually use that in Apex, we can retrieve our custom metadata type, create the account. In this case, just to keep it all on one slide, we'll have the account that we're going to do the calculation over, pass the account into the wrapper, do our sales pipeline calculation, and then as before, we create a formula instance. It's still returning a Boolean, but now it's working around the account wrapper type, pass the formula in, evaluate it, and get that Boolean back. It's much simpler, but we're able to integrate other parts of the Apex language into that formula engine. I think another key point here was return types.
Yes, oh yes. I think we've only shown Boolean return types in all our examples.
Yes, correct.
But
so obviously we want more than that.
Yeah.
So you can actually use most of the other formula return types. You can have your formulas calculate strings, date times, numerical values. Gives you that complete range of formulas. Right, and that's beta. You can try that out in summer 24. We're aiming to have this available for you as a GA feature in the spring 25 release, so you can use that in your production orgs. There's a whole bunch of scenarios around rules engines and a large number of features around that area that this is applicable to. And also just generally reducing the number of formulas that you might have to store in the database, which are only needed at runtime. Right, with that, let's switch to talking about unhandled Apex exceptions. So if you're running a transaction and something happens like a heap limit is encountered or a CPU limit, or you throw an exception that's not caught, it's going to cause your transaction to terminate. When that happens, typically what we'll do is we'll send you an exception email, but there's limits around that. And there's basically a rate limit and deduplication on how many emails we will send for unhandled exceptions. That produces a number of problems for you as consumers of that. Firstly, if you're throwing a lot of errors, and we rate limit it, you may not be aware of the magnitude of the problem. How many errors am I actually getting? How big is this problem? Is it 1? Is it 10? And perhaps the other larger problem is that rate limit is not specific to your org. It's actually shared across the instance. So if you have a noisy neighbor who's throwing a lot of errors, they could potentially cause it so you don't see any exception emails, which is really problematic for you because you now don't even know there is a problem in your org. And then once you do get those emails, you actually have to have a system to retrieve the information from them to make sense of like the stack trace, which org through it. There's a lot more extra handling required there. So to make this easier for you, in Winter 25, we're giving you a free tier of the event monitoring for the Apex unexpected event type. This is great because now, once every 24 hours, this CSV file will be generated, which contains the complete list of unhandled exceptions for your org. You can pull that complete list down, parse it as you need. There's multiple ways to do this. You can have an admin or somebody go into the setup UI. There's an event log file browser for you there. It also has API automation tooling around it, so you can just pull it straight out of the API as some sort of automated process. Maybe to give you an example of how easy this is, we can do so with an Apex scheduled class. So here I basically have a SOQL query. I'm going to pull the latest CSV from the event log file. And then once I've got that CSV, I can use my friend DataWeave, which is available in Apex through our integration there, and directly transform that CSV into S objects, which I can then store in the database. One nice thing to point out about DataWeave here was how easy it was to do that CSV to Apex object translation. There was some interesting encoding around the double quotes within that CSV file, but DataWeave allowed me to express that like one property to say this is how it's escaped. So I didn't have to do a bunch of string manipulation there to get that information over. I think another good point about DataWeave is that is free in Apex. You don't need to buy an additional license. But then now once I've got those objects, I can just store them in Apex. I store them, and I can run that scheduled job at, say, 2 a.m. every morning after the other initial file's been generated. And now that I've got those, I can do things like use the rest of the Salesforce platform. I can generate reports and such to say, like, well, how are my errors tracking in the system? Now, this is based on the free tier, the 24-hour monitoring. Obviously, if your needs are more complex or you need finer grained, there are other products that will give you a much finer detail on what exceptions are happening in your system. You could look at like Scale Center or event monitoring to pull you more information. But it's important that you know what errors and such are happening in your system. And with that, Jared, I'll pass it over to you to run us through what's changing with 2GP packaging.
Thank you. So yeah, I'd like to talk about some improvements, thank you, we're making to Apex and managed packages, specifically 2GP managed packages. And the end goal of this is to help you migrate to 2GP. So today, you might have managed applications that are 1GP, or you might have 1GP managed applications installed. And you can't use all the benefits of 2GP development today because there's no migration path from 1GP to 2GP. And we're trying to fix gaps to give you a smooth migration path. And John Bello, one of the PMs, has done a talk on that, and you can go and see that. And hopefully it's recorded.
I'll provide some links in the notes.
Yeah. So who's this relevant for? This is relevant to anyone who consumes managed package API or who publishes a managed package API. So I think it's got fairly broad relevance. OK, let's go through what the improvements are. So it's all about making package upgrades safer. So today, with 2GP managed packages, we have some important but basic safety, and that is around manageability rules. These things are rules that mean that you can't remove things from a package that someone might be depending on. You can't delete a global Apex class or a custom object. And this is there to support the use case or the raison d'etre for managed packages, which is that once you have, as an ISV or as a publisher of a managed package, if someone installs your managed package, they can upgrade that with confidence, knowing that their integrations won't break that depend on this thing. But there are a couple of gaps compared to 1GP. So let's work through an example where there's gaps in 2GP. So this is going to be like, there's going to be two sides to this. We're going to have the package publisher on the left, and this is an ISV, and they've got a namespace, eShop, and they sell a commerce package. And Daniel, do you think you could play a PM?
Yep,
you could pretend to be a PM?
I can manage that. I can play a 2 PM hats, yep.
Okay, that's great. And this ISV has decided to offer an extension point. It's actually a pretty simple commerce package at the moment, but they do offer their customers the ability to customize it if they need to. And in this case, the extension point is to customize the price calculation in the online shopping cart. And I'm going to play the role of the ISV's customer. And I was pretty happy with this, and it was working for my original business plan, which was to sell virtual objects like stock and investing advice from an LLM. And that didn't go so well, so I've had to change plans. I've had to pivot. And I've had to, can you think of something else that's shiny that we could sell, Daniel?
Oh, I got just the thing. We can start
what
selling
could be as shiny
plushies.
as
big market for plushies.
as
We'll
an
sell
LLM.
plushies.
Yeah,
That'll
this
be
is the
good-
only thing we can
our
find
new
that's
business
shiny.
model.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, but we have to ship these, so we actually have to have shipping cost on our online cart. And the commerce package doesn't support it.
But I gave you an integration point.
But yeah, but we can help ourselves here.
Yeah.
So I go as the ISV's customer. I extend the cart calculator with my own class, cart calculator with shipping. I override the getTotalPrice method, which calls the original method to go and add up the items in the cart, all those plushies, and I add shipping costs to them. And we're happy, we're selling plushies. But I don't really want to invest in developing commerce features, like basic commerce features like shipping cost. I want to figure out how to sell plushies better.
So I'm a product manager. I'm hearing a need here. I've had perception powers as a product manager. This is probably something a lot of my customers as a commerce package are going to need. So I'll go to my developers.
That would be great.
I will go to my developers and say, can you please add a shopping cart calculation for shipping cost into our package? And then all our customers will be happy.
Yeah. And actually, you think that my design for adding shipping costs works quite well.
Can we just, we'll just mirror our functionality on that.
Yeah.
So let's do that.
So Daniel's developers go and implement shipping costs and shipping calculations in their commerce package in version 2. So originally it was version 1, now it's version 2. And I want to adopt that, so I go and upgrade to version 2 of the shop package. Hoping to get this benefit. So let's see what the code looks like in my org as the ISV's customer. On the left, there's the ISV's code, the cart calculator with the getTotalPrice and the getShippingCost method, and on the left, and on the right, there's my code, the cart calculator with shipping. And so someone goes to checkout, we try and calculate the total price, and the Apex compiler goes and compiles cart calculator with shipping. Oops, there's a compilation error.
That's a bit of a problem for me with both my product manager hats on. My customers are not compiling, which means they're not shipping anything, nothing's working, everything's hard broken. What have you done to my business?
Yeah, and even Salesforce is unhappy because I'm unhappy as the ISV's customer. And the reason is that we require an override keyword if you override a method, and that's kind of important for your usability as a developer. Like, we want to make sure that you are actually overriding something when you specify that you're overriding something, or that you don't override something by accident. So that's why we require that. Now, how do we usually solve this problem? So we solve this problem, for example, when you integrate with the Salesforce API. We ask you to specify an API version. And so what that does is that, or what we promise when you do that as Salesforce, is that we will maintain the shape of the API and the behavior of the API. And 1GP supports this concept too. So you can specify the package version that you depend on if it's a 1GP managed package in the version settings for an Apex class. And maybe you've seen this before. And there's an example at the bottom right of the version settings that cart calculator with shipping would have. And as of today, those would only have 1GP managed packages with them, but we're also adding support for 2GP managed packages down here. And you can see that the eShop Commerce package is obviously a 2GP package. It's got the 2 packages in the same namespace. But we want to specify that when we originally developed the cart calculator with shipping class, we developed it against version 1. And in fact, that will be done by default for you. So when you first save a class, we capture all the installed package versions you had in your org when you saved that class for the first time. Let's see what it looks like if you do source-based development. So the Metro.xml file for cart calculator with shipping has a package versions tag. And it has a major number, minor number, version 1. But in 1GP, we'd have the namespace.
Which is unique.
Yes, in 1GP.
In 1GP. Yeah.
But obviously no longer in 2GP. So instead, we have a package ID in there, which is the unique way to reference a package. So what does that allow us to do? Now, cart calculator with shipping has said, I depend on eShop, but I depend on it at version 1. And then when we compile cart calculator with shipping, we will load up cart calculator, but we'll only show the parts of cart calculator that existed in version 1. So the global class cart calculator existed, the getTotalPrice method existed, but the getShippingCost didn't because it was introduced in version 2, so we'll hide that during compilation. And therefore, there'll be no conflict, and this will be compiling.
That's great. We're back to shipping.
That's great. We're back to shipping.
We've got a product.
Plushies.
We can ship it again. We're back in business.
Back to
Our
shipping
customers
shiny
in
things.
business. Is everybody happy? Are we good?
OK, well, let's see. Maybe you've spotted another problem. Let's see what happens when we calculate the total price. We'll call the with shipping total price, and that will call the superclass method total price, add up all the plushies in the cart, add shipping cost, return that value to the with shipping total price, which will add shipping cost again. Oh no. So we're shipping plushies, but we're pricing the cart wrong.
We've double charged them for shipping.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
they're
we've
not
got
going to be happy. Not happy customers.
Slightly upset customers.
Yeah, not great.
Yeah.
I don't want to take this down again. Can you fix it?
Okay. Remember what I said about what an API version promises. Both the shape and the behavior of the API stays the same. And the thing we're missing is that the behavior of the API has changed. So let's zoom into the code, the cart calculator code in the eShop package to see how we'd fix that. So we kind of need to now differentiate our behavior based on the version that the caller wants to call us as. So if the caller of getTotalPrice, that's cart calculator, the shipping, depends on eShop greater than or equals to 2, then we can include all the latest features like shipping cost. If it depends on version 1, we have to just return price. And the kind of key piece of information that's missing at the moment is what version did the caller call me as. Now, 1GP already provides a method to do this, to get this information called system.requestVersion, but this didn't work in 2GP because we didn't have those version settings. Now we've added support for system.requestVersion for 2GP managed packages, and here's how you use it. System.requestVersion represents the caller version, and then you embed in source code the version which you introduced a new feature as. So you've got min version with shipping cost was introduced in version 2. Sorry, the shipping cost was introduced in version 2. So that's a minimum version with that feature. And then you compare the two, and if the caller version is less than the version you introduced that feature in, you would just return the original behavior, so we return price. Otherwise, you return the new behavior, you return price plus shipping cost. And so that's how we preserve behavior. And that's it. So in summary, in order to make package upgrades safer for 2GP managed packages, we're allowing consumers of managed packages to specify package versions. And that does two things. It goes and keeps the shape of those Apex APIs in those managed packages stable to make sure things keep compiling. And it gives those managed package authors the ability to keep their behavior stable.
I think this is key, right? Because not everybody's a package creator or an ISV, but everybody just about consumes a package somewhere along the line. So you need to be aware of what version you're depending on of that package to make sure you're expressing that correctly and updating them as required.
Yeah, and there's one more thing I want to add to that too, which is like stepping back to the even bigger picture, which is we'd like to give you access to 2GP for all the development benefits it provides. You know,
source control,
more flexible development, ability to split up your packages, and fixing this or filling these gaps means that 1GP and 2GP now have the same feature set, and it allows for the seamless upgrade path or migration path from 1GP to 2GP, which is what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you. So with that, we'll go back and give you an overview of our roadmap again, just so you can see timing-wise where things are heading. So summer 24, you have that today. That has the beta, the current active beta of cursors that we talked about earlier in the presentation, and formula evaluation in Apex. You can try those today. It also gives you the GA feature of the Data Cloud SOCL queries against data model objects, or DMOs, and the corresponding testing support for that. Another feature which we didn't have time to talk about today was the scheduled job improvements. These are mostly based around the setup UI, things such as allowing you to pause and resume scheduled jobs. That's a super useful feature of, say, if you're doing a large rollout and you just don't want those, you want those scheduled jobs that are currently running to stop for that duration. But then when it comes time to start again, you don't necessarily want to have to reschedule them, figure out the right user for them to work at. You can just pause and then resume them. There's also expansions there around what you can see in the setup UI. You can see now you can see and edit the cron expression that goes with those jobs to make it much easier to tell what they're scheduled to run at. I think that was the main areas that changed in that. So after summer 24, I think winter 25 is the next season for our release map. Yeah, you're getting the free tier of event monitoring for the last 24 hours in that CSV, which was the feature I talked about there. And we're also expanding the SOCL test mocking out to external objects as well. And releases beyond that, what comes after winter 25? Spring 25?
Don't ask me, I only know internal development numbers.
Yeah, fair enough. It's the last day. Okay, so yeah, after that, release after that, we're basically working towards formula evaluation in Apex as being a GA feature, along with zip support in Apex as being a GA feature for you. And then building on top of that, our enhancements to the second generation package versioning. Looking out even longer term than that, obviously we would like to get cursors to GA for you. We have some feedback from that. If there's areas you'd like to see evolving in that, please do let us know, because we're still establishing how that feature will look at GA. And you may have seen our TDX presentation where we went into depth about the future of generics, or now more referred to as parametric types in Apex. That is still evolving. It is still on our long-term roadmap. As we explained at TDX, that is a long-term project. There is complexities in bringing that into the language in a safe way, in a way that you want to be able to consume it. Now, as I mentioned, all those features, it would be great if you had feedback on them. This QR code will take you to the Trailblazer community. There I'll make a post which will have links to where you can provide that feedback. I will also post the slides for this talk there if you want to catch up on them, and links to hopefully the Salesforce Plus recording. But yeah, I would love your feedback. We're also looking at feedback on other areas that I didn't talk about in this talk, new features that are just starting to come together on our roadmap. We're looking into traceability and observability in Apex. So that spans everything from from debug logs for like that on-demand tracing, the structure of those debug logs, how large they are, how long we retain them for, or where we retain them, and also for like real-time monitoring and live transactions in production where you might not want to turn the debug logs on, but you want to know the state of your system. So if you have feedback or areas of interest or gaps that you need in that, yeah, please do get in touch. I would like to know so we can expand our features out in that direction in the future. I think that covered the main part of it. So yep, thank you. Appreciated you all coming. Pleased to share the last day here at Dreamforce here with you and go over our roadmap. And yeah, do look forward to hearing of your feedback. We do actually, survey feedback is highly valued. It helps structure how we make these sessions in the future. We do have some time for Q&A. We can either come up to the mic or we can talk to you afterwards if you like. We can run through any questions you have about Apex. Happy to talk about those. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? We can either take them from the mic, or it's a small enough group we can have them at the front if you'd like. Yeah. We'll just take them at the front.
Go home.
Yep. Everybody's exhausted?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah.
The methods for essentially creating a record
In the test context?
for the
Yeah.
is that only for accessing data file?
No, so that you can use that to stub anything in a test context, but it's only for a test context. So you can use it for any scenarios where you would have otherwise done JSON deserialization to get that object. Yeah, we looked at what people were doing with JSON deserialization and said, that's silly, why don't we just make something? And there was no reason to restrict that to just Data Cloud. But the SOCL stub is restricted to Data Cloud. So you can't SOCL stub accounts. Does that make sense? But because that gets into another large discussion. Yeah. Cool. How do we handle the formula values in a test context?
Like the formula expression, or?
It'll run perfect. Like there's no restriction on the formula evaluation. So the idea was with the formula eval is it all happens at runtime, so you don't need to stub it typically. Or are you thinking of a formula field on an S object?
Yeah, I don't want to, say for example, a formula field is a combination of like date and like start date and date and something.
Yeah.
I don't want to give it those values, but I don't want to go to the tracker. Rather, in the stub, I want to just set that value for the formula field. Can I do it in the stub program?
No, I don't believe it is possible to set like a stubbed value for a formula. Yeah, no, it's not possible. That again comes back to why we didn't put the stubbing for non-data cloud entities. So data cloud entities and external objects support it, but internal objects like account don't support it. And I guess that would be the only way you could have got a formula into it.
I think I understood your question.
If I misunderstood
I had a
it.
different understanding. Yeah. I think when you create the, if we could go back to the slide, because I even forgot the
You want a
API.
formula slide?
Not the formula slide, but the SOCL stubbing.
SOCL stubbing?
Yeah.
We'll get there. We have a lot of slides. Yeah.
Yeah, it was create subquery row. Are you asking, can you set a formula field on create subquery row?
In the new graph string, right? String
So
Yeah.
yeah, in this you literally define the value for all the fields on the object you're stuffing. Although I'm not sure what happens if that field was a. Do you know Anand? Yeah. Okay. So Anand is yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you can. So I mean, I guess so. You're saying in a.
You can set a value for it because the idea is you could have done that previously using JSON deserialize, but this kind of happens.
Okay, so yeah, that is a good point. That's probably a good point to point out in our documentation.
And I can use it only for the data cloud, not for the
No, this. Yeah, test create stub query row works for anything, and then the really idea is to just stop you having to do the JSON deserialization, and make your life easier. Yeah, make your intention clear, and you don't have to build up those crazy strings and try and concatenate them.
usually formula fields, sometimes they go 2-3 levels down and I don't
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
I just want to
you just wanted a value which was sufficient for your test. No, that's a good use case. We should add that to our doc.
Samples code.
Sample. Okay, no, good point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi.
Yes, for the formula eval,
Yes.
could you use that to like grab data from a related object?
So we work just over information that's in memory at runtime. We won't go off to the database and retrieve it. If you had retrieved the related object, though, it should be able to, at runtime,
Yeah.
transverse that relationship. But you need to have the information at runtime.
In this example, if you wanted the contact, all the contacts associated with the account, with the subquery that gets back all the contacts, that's where you have it.
There may be another way.
You're grabbing your mic.
Okay. There may be another way to do it as well, which is, I think if you went to the sales pipeline example, there's a property with a getter, and I think maybe you can probably do a query in there too.
Oh, you're saying.
You're saying you do have to get the data first.
Um,
You have to get the data before you
Well, yeah. But yeah, I think what Jared's saying, I was like, you could imagine that get method on the sales pipeline could actually go off and do a query. Like, you don't have to preset the sales pipeline value. You can do whatever Apex evaluation you want and have the formula engine call it. I'm not suggesting you go crazy between the formula engine and Apex, but the functionality, like, I mean, if you want to go crazy, you could make like a call out in that get method, and it could go off and pull data from wherever, or you could make a socket call.
Well, yeah, I think that was just trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
So, like, maybe create a formula field that would just store the value. We could just use the formula eval, but
Yeah.
you're saying it's not going to work.
you still need to get the data from somewhere at some time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and that will still cost you limits.
Yeah,
You-
and part of the point of this was by avoiding to go to the database, you don't need to use SOQL queries, so you don't impact that limit. You can just work with information you've already got in memory. Yep. Cool.
About some of the things you can check in like the formula field, like the run users, are they enabled with a particular custom permission? Yeah. Because that's like, getting that data is actually pretty complicated.
That means if it's part of the standard formula syntax, it should be supported here. You can get
Do you remember whether we restricted access to $user?
I'd have
There's
to
things like $user, isn't there? Do you know if we restricted that, or is it supported on the?
it's supported. All
Okay.
the formula context variables are supported. So $user, those are all supported in this, in the Apex.
We must have initialized them before the formula engine go.
Retrieve all your custom permission
No,
data first.
if it's in the formula variable, right? Formula supports global context $user. So anything that's all about $user is fair game. You don't need to create a database query for context variables. That we'll already have, right? Things, but it's set by whatever. So if you're in a test and you do a run as, then $user will be whoever you're running as.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, the engineers had a great time building this out to be very thorough. Hi.
From some of that last stuff you were briefly mentioning about debug logs.
Yes. So, how are you for time? I was just wondering if we take. Oh, I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah. So, what is it you need with debug logs?
Like, do you have any plans for like expanding where you can put your debug logs, like especially like storing like just having them stored externally instead of inside?
Yeah, so that was, definitely that was one of the areas, like, because obviously we can only generate and store so much debug log for everyone. So what you want to be able to stream them out somewhere, how would you retrieve them? How would you like to retrieve them?
I would like to send it to S3 or CloudWatch.
S3 or CloudWatch?
Okay.
Okay, no.
So
Yeah, well, that's fair. Like,
Would you, yeah. Are you looking for always-on logging, or is this
Well, yeah, of course,
debug?
that'd be the
Huh?
next, of course, that'd be the next.
Yeah.
yeah, and then you could just stream it out to where you need it,
Yeah.
and then deal with the files from there. And what about the format of those logs once you get them?